You know, usually when we talk about a civilization collapsing, there is this underlying expectation of something highly visible.
Right, like a cinematic event.
Yeah, exactly. We picture these massive earthquakes or, invading armies cresting over a hill, maybe meteor strikes or sudden economic crashes where everyone is just running around frantically on a trading floor.
It's a very Hollywood way of looking at it.
It really is. It is this idea that historians centuries later will just be able to point at the rubble or a specific date on a calendar and say, yep, there it is. That is what ended it.
Well, and it is oddly comforting to think about civilizational collapse in those terms.
Comforting. How is a meteor strike comforting?
Because we like our existential threats to be physical and obvious. We want them to be things we can build physical walls against or things we can track with radar.
Oh, I see, like a tangible enemy.
Exactly. At least something we can clearly point a finger at and identifies the enemy at the gates.
Yeah. But then you step into the world of sociology, or in the case of our deep dive today, deep historical and scriptural philosophy. And suddenly that disaster movie script is completely thrown out the window.
It really is. It's completely dismantled.
Because we are looking at a civilizational landscape today that is honestly much more subtle and I think terrifying. You don't need a meteor to destroy a society.
No, you really don't.
You do not need a foreign army to conquer your capital. You just need people to start breaking their promises to each other.
Yeah, it is the absolute definition of an invisible creeping rot.
Creeping rot. That is a great way to put it.
Because the overarching argument we are looking at today posits that the moment the foundation of trust gives way within a society, the entire superstructure is already doomed.
It's just a matter of time.
Right. It does not matter if the skyscrapers are still standing or if the stock market is artificially inflated.
Or if the military is the strongest in the world.
Exactly. If the people inside those structures fundamentally believe that the social contract is like a manipulation tactic rather than a binding truth, then the civilization is already operating as a ghost.
Wow, operating as a ghost. And that actually brings us to the mission of our deep dive today. So welcome, everyone. We are unpacking an incredibly profound framework from the Tului Islam Digital Archive today.
It's a fantastic source.
It is. Specifically, we are looking at Lecture 1015 by Allama Parwez. We are going to be exploring this really dense philosophical synthesis of Quranic verses from Surah An-Nahl.
Right. Specifically the section covering verses 94 through 99.
Yeah. But for you listening right now, do not let the idea of ancient text make you think this is going to be some dry historical lecture. Because Parwez takes this source material and applies it to the very modern, very real mechanics of how a society either thrives in a state of absolute synergy or how it literally eats itself alive from the inside out.
The way Parwez approaches this text is almost surgical. He is not just looking for moral platitudes here.
Yeah, he's definitely not.
He is looking for the architectural blueprints of human sociology. He treats these verses as a manual for what we might call the economics of integrity.
The economics of integrity, I like that.
Yeah, he is trying to decode the mathematical equation for a pure life, demonstrating how personal honesty does not just make you a pleasant person to be around, but it actually translates into permanent, unshakable civilizational infrastructure.
And here's the thing for you listening today. Everyone wants the good life, right? But today we're redefining what that actually means. We are introducing Allama Parwez's concept of Hayat on Tayyiba.
Right, which translates to the pure or good life.
Exactly, but not as a pile of cash or a massive house or a life of passive luxury, but as a societal flow state.
The flow state, yeah.
Imagine a state where a society is maximally productive, incredibly innovative, and entirely safe, all because of one radical foundational rule, which is that no one is lying to each other.
No one. It sounds almost wildly utopian to our modern ears, honestly.
It really does.
We are so conditioned to expect deception that a society without it sounds like literal science fiction. But Parvez's argument is that this isn't a utopia. It is the baseline requirement for a society to survive the long arc of history.
I am trying to wrap my head around this idea of honesty as physical infrastructure, like treating a promise with the same structural importance as a steel beam in a bridge.
It's a massive paradigm shift.
But let's look at where Parwez begins his argument, which centers on a severe warning against using oaths and covenants as tools for deception. Okay, let's unpack this because the text uses this incredibly visceral linguistic imagery here.
It does. It's very striking.
It describes the act of using an oath to deceive someone as causing the slipping foot or fatazilla quadamun in Arabic.
The linguistic choice of Fatazillaquatamon is just brilliant because it forces the reader out of abstract morality and right into a purely physical sensation.
Yeah, it's very grounding.
Think about the mechanics of walking. When you are walking on solid, predictable ground, you do not even think about your footing right. You just walk.
Right. You're on autopilot.
Exactly. Your energy goes entirely into moving forward or looking at the horizon, carrying a load, talking to the person next to you. But the moment your foot slips, whether on ice or mud or a loose step, your entire body instantly goes into a state of pure panic.
Oh man, your stomach just drops.
Exactly. Your arms flail, your core tightens, your heart rate spikes. Every single ounce of your cognitive and physical energy is suddenly diverted away from your destination and entirely focused on just keeping yourself from falling flat on your face and breaking your jaw.
Right, so using the social contract for deception causes a whole society to basically lose its footing in reality.
Yeah.
I love this imagery. It is like saying you can't run a marathon on ice and you can't run a civilization on lies.
That's a perfect analogy.
Because if every time I step forward I have to worry about the ground giving way, I am never going to win a race. I am just going to be exhausted from the sheer act of trying to stay upright.
And Parwez uses this exact physiological response to explain sociology. I mean, a society operates on a massively complex web of invisible agreements.
Right, invisible agreements.
I agree that the digital numbers in my bank account represent actual purchasing power. I agree that when the traffic light turns red, the 2-ton metal machine hurtling toward the intersection will actually stop.
We really take that for granted.
We absolutely do.
Yeah.
I agree that when I buy food from the store, it is not poisoned. When a society begins to break its mutual trust, when oaths and contracts and promises become strategic tools to trick the other party rather than genuine ironclad commitments that invisible web dissolves.
The ground turns to black ice.
Yes, the ground turns to black ice.
Now, Parwez provides a lot of historical context to show that this slipping foot isn't just theoretical. He shares a really striking anecdote from his own childhood to illustrate what a high-trust society actually looked like before the ice fully melted, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a story from a town called Batala in pre-partition India.
Right. It is a fascinating ground-level glimpse into the sociological landscape of that specific era. Parwez describes growing up in a diverse neighborhood where different religious and cultural communities lived in incredibly close proximity.
And he specifically highlights a mundane daily interaction that escalated into a philosophical revelation.
Right. He talks about a Hindu oil seller, a teli, and a Muslim cowherd, a gujjar.
So we have these two men from different faith backgrounds engaging in a basic commercial transaction. And there's a dispute between the two of them over the sale or the term.
This happens in markets.
Exactly. But in the heat of this argument, the cowherd, the Muslim man, tells a deliberate lie to gain quick advantage in the dispute.
And I found the reaction of the Hindu oil seller to be the most revealing part of this entire text. Because if that happened today, the guy would just get mad, call him a cheat, maybe leave a bad review online or call the cops.
Right, it's just a normal dispute.
But the oil seller is existentially shocked. Parwez remembers him exclaiming, "Oh, Muslim, you've spoken a lie." He doesn't say, "Oh, you cheat." He links the lie directly to the man's identity.
Yeah, and that phrasing is a massive sociological tell. Parwez analyzes this heavily.
Yeah.
The oil seller wasn't just throwing an insult. He was pointing out what he viewed as a bizarre oxymoron.
Like an impossible contradiction.
Exactly. In his mind, based on the historical behavior and the established social contract of that era, the term Muslim was supposed to be literally synonymous with absolute truthfulness.
Parwez points out that in this framework, to be a Momin, a believer, was to be the ultimate source of am. And am translates to peace, safety, and security.
Right.
It meant you were supposed to be the one person in the room that anyone, friend or foe, could hand their valuables to or trust their life with because your word was an ironclad guarantee.
And the shock of the oil seller proves that this concept of am wasn't just a theological ideal written in an old book. It was a lived, breathing reality on the streets of Batala.
It was a social brand, essentially.
The brand of the believer was absolute integrity. So when the cowherd lied, he didn't just break a minor business contract over some oil or milk. He shattered the expectation of safety in his community.
He introduced friction.
He made the foot slip.
But, I want to push back on this a little bit because it is easy to romanticize a childhood memory, right? Isn't it possible Parwez is looking at the past through rose-colored glasses here?
That's a fair question.
Because we know human history is full of deception. Was it really that ironclad, or is this just nostalgia for a simpler time before modern complexity made absolute truth impossible?
Parwez actually anticipates that skepticism. He isn't claiming that nobody ever lied in the past. What he is highlighting is the systemic expectation.
The expectation.
Today, we expect politicians to lie. We expect marketing campaigns to exaggerate. We read the fine print because we assume the large print is a trap.
Sadly true.
In the society Parwez is describing, the baseline expectation was trust. The lie was the shocking anomaly. Today, the lie is the baseline, and absolute self-sacrificing honesty is the shocking anomaly.
Oh, wow, yeah. That transition from trust as a baseline to deception as a baseline is exactly what Parwez zeroes in on when he contrasts this Quranic ideal with modern political philosophy.
He specifically brings up Niccolo Machiavelli.
Right, his seminal work, The Prince. And if we are talking about the slipping foot, Machiavelli essentially wrote the instruction manual on how to wear ice skates while actively pushing everyone else over.
That is a very apt way to describe it, honestly. Parwez points out that in modern secular politics, and he uses the word secular here, not in the sense of separating church and state, but in the sense of disconnecting governance from permanent, immutable moral values.
Disconnecting from values.
In that system, deception is no longer viewed as a moral failing. It has been elevated to an essential leadership skill. Machiavelli explicitly celebrated leaders who could make treaties when they were in a position of weakness and then ruthlessly break those exact same treaties the moment they became strong enough to face the consequences.
It is the formalization of the strategic lie.
Exactly.
The philosophy that honesty is a luxury for the weak, a naive constraint for those who lack ambition, but the powerful can and must bend the truth to maintain control and ensure the survival of their state.
Precisely. And Parwez argues that this Machiavellian approach has become the unquestioned international standard today. Nations sign massive, highly publicized treaties, but with the secret unspoken caveat that they will only honor them as long as it is politically or economically expedient.
Right? The moment the math changes, the moment honoring the treaty becomes a burden, it is voided.
But Parwez's core thesis is that this behavior is exactly why the modern world feels like it is drowning in perpetual anxiety and chaos. Because fundamentally, no one trusts anyone. The geopolitical ground is entirely made of ice.
But let me interrupt here, because if I am a CEO of a company or the leader of a nation and I am facing a truly ruthless enemy or a cutthroat competitor who is willing to play dirty, isn't sticking to absolute truth just a suicide pact? If my competitor is using strategic lies to steal my market share, or a hostile nation is using deception to maneuver armies to my border, doesn't a rigid adherence to a social contract just make me a sitting duck? How does Parwez reconcile the collateral damage of sticking to your ideals when the other guy has a knife to your throat?
It is the ultimate pragmatic question, right? And it cuts to the absolute core of Parwez's philosophy. His argument is that the moment you justify a strategic lie to save yourself, you might win a temporary tactical victory. You might save your company this quarter. You might secure your border this year. But you have already lost the war for your civilization's soul. Because in order to win, you have just willingly introduced the poison of mistrust into your own systemic bloodstream. You have taught your own citizens, your own employees, and your allies that your word is conditional.
So what does this all mean? How does he dismantle the very concept that sometimes a lie is genuinely necessary for the greater good? Because that is a very deeply held belief for a lot of well-meaning people.
Parwez deconstructs this by looking at the logical endpoint of the necessary lie, specifically when it is applied to ideology or religion. And to illustrate this, the source text spends significant time outlining Parwez's fierce critique of a fatwa, a religious ruling that was issued by a prominent religious party leader during his era.
Now, before we explore this, we need to state clearly for everyone listening that we are impartially reporting Parwez's critique as it exists in the source material. We are not taking a side here, nor are we endorsing any specific political or religious viewpoint regarding this historical fatwa. We are strictly unpacking the philosophical and sociological argument Parwez is making.
Absolutely. So the text notes that this particular fatwa allegedly permitted telling lies for important necessities of life, or more specifically, to achieve a grand systemic goal, such as establishing an Islamic state or gaining political power for a righteous cause.
So the internal logic being, if the ultimate end goal is virtuous and mandated by faith, then tactically bending the truth to navigate a corrupt political system is permissible, perhaps even a strategic obligation.
Right, and Parwez vehemently, categorically rejects this logic. He argues that this approach completely and utterly destroys the very foundation of the religion or the moral society they claim they're trying to establish.
Because it undermines the whole thing.
His reasoning is devastatingly simple. If you issue a ruling that says a believer can lie for a strategic advantage, then how can anyone ever again trust a believer?
It creates an impossible paradox. If I know that your religion allows you to lie to me, if you deem it necessary for your goals, then every time you make a promise to me, I have to calculate whether you are telling the truth or whether you are just exercising your religious loophole.
Exactly. How can you possibly establish a society of a society of absolute peace and security, if the fundamental building block of that society, the believer, is permitted to use deception?
You just can't.
Parwez argues that it turns faith from a sanctuary of truth into a highly sophisticated tool for fraud. If your baseline is that truth is situational, then nobody knows where they stand. Your society's foot is perpetually slipping. You were just wearing religious clothing while playing Machiavelli's game.
To counter this idea of the necessary lie, Parwez doesn't just offer theory, he brings up historical giants. He points to individuals who face the ultimate strategic disadvantage, literal death, and still utterly refuse to compromise the truth.
Yeah.
He makes the case that the people who actually shape human history for the better, the ones whose legacies survive the entropy of time, are the ones who treat truth as absolute, not situational.
He uses Socrates as a prime example, which is fascinating because it shows Parwez drawing on philosophical traditions outside of strictly Islamic history to prove a universal sociological point.
Let's really dive into the Socrates example because the context of his choice is staggering when you think about it in terms of strategic lying.
Right. So Socrates was put on trial in Athens. The charges were essentially corrupting the youth and impiety against the state pantheon of gods. He was tried, found guilty, and sentenced to death by drinking a cup of poisonous hemlock.
Brutal.
Now, the historical record, specifically Plato's dialogues like the Credo, shows us that Socrates was not trapped. He had incredibly wealthy friends.
They were trying to save him.
He had devoted students who had successfully bribed the guards. They literally had a ship waiting at the harbor. All he had to do was walk out of his cell and slip away in the night to a neighboring city-state.
Or even before that, during the trial itself. He could have just played the political game. He could have apologized, shed a few tears, recanted his more controversial philosophy, and promised to just retire quietly to the countryside.
Absolutely.
He could have told a highly strategic lie to save his own life and stay with his family.
But he categorically refused. He drank the poison. And Parwez asks us to really sit with that question, why? Why did a man of such profound intellect choose physical death over a simple tactical lie?
I still struggle with this, honestly, because if Socrates escapes, he gets to keep teaching, right? He gets to write more, influence more people, maybe raise his children. By dying, he deprives the world of his ongoing intellect. Doesn't that make his refusal to lie almost selfishly stubborn?
It seems that way to our modern, highly pragmatic minds. But Parwez argues that Socrates understood a deeper math. Socrates knew that his physical survival was worth far less than the structural integrity of his philosophy.
Oh, we see.
If he ran away in the night, or if he stood before the jury and lied to save his skin, he would be sending a devastating message to every student he ever taught. He would be saying, my teachings about absolute truth and virtue are just empty words. When things get difficult, survival is more important than integrity.
So by lying, he would have destroyed the very philosophy he spent his life building. He would have bought himself maybe 10 more years of breathing, but his legacy would have been exposed as a fraud. By drinking the hemlock, he permanently sealed his philosophy with his life.
Exactly. And Parwez uses another profound example this time, directly from the Quranic narrative, the story of Pharaoh's magicians.
Right.
This is a story of immense political theater. When Moses confronted Pharaoh with his message, Pharaoh, the ultimate Machiavellian ruler, decided to crush Moses publicly. He summoned the greatest magicians in his empire to defeat Moses in a public spectacle, intending to expose Moses as a charlatan.
But the spectacle backfires spectacularly. When the magicians actually witness Moses' signs, they realize with absolute clarity that they are not looking at a superior magic trick. They realize they are looking at absolute, unvarnished truth.
And their reaction is immediate. They submit to that truth right there in front of everyone.
You have to imagine the political humiliation for Pharaoh in that moment.
Yeah.
His own hand-picked experts have just validated his greatest rival in front of the entire nation. He is furious.
Oh yeah, beyond furious.
So he threatens them with the most brutal, agonizing death imaginable in the ancient world. He declares he will crucify them on the trunks of palm trees and amputate their hands and feet on opposite sides.
Yeah, he is asserting the ultimate leverage. He's saying, I have total control over your physical bodies, and I will destroy them if you do not recant and tell a strategic lie to restore my political standing.
And the magician's response is just breathtaking. They are looking at the most powerful tyrant on earth, a man who literally holds their physical existence in his hands, and they essentially shrug. They say, do whatever you want to our physical bodies. You can only judge us in this life. You can't touch our truth.
What's fascinating here is the conceptual shift Parwez highlights.
Yeah.
In that single moment of choosing truth over a strategic lie, these anonymous magicians achieved true immortality. Pharaoh thought he was powerful because he could destroy tissue and bone.
Right.
But the magicians recognized that the truth they had just embraced was a permanent value, while their physical bodies were entirely temporary and decaying anyway.
It completely flips the Machiavellian script. Socrates' physical body turned to dust thousands of years ago, but his commitment to truth is still the foundation of philosophy classes globally.
Yep.
The magicians were almost certainly brutally executed that very day, but their courage is immortalized in a text read by billions. Parwez is using these examples to completely reject the idea that lying can ever be a prophetic tradition or justified by faith.
Exactly.
If the greatest giants of history refuse to lie, even when facing torture and death, how on earth can modern politicians or business leaders justify lying just for a slight bump in the polls or a better quarterly earnings report?
And this transition leads us into a really profound economic calculation, because we keep circling back to this idea of trading one thing for another. Why did Socrates and the magicians value a conceptual, invisible thing called truth over the very real, very tangible act of breathing?
It does seem counterintuitive.
To a modern sensibility rooted purely in materialism, their choice sounds like absolute madness. But Parwez argues it's because they understood a completely different kind of economics.
Which perfectly sets up the next phase of Parwez's argument found in verses 95 and 96 of Surah An-Nahl. The text here issues a stark warning against selling your covenants, your promises, and your integrity for a miserable price. The Arabic phrase used is qalilan thamanan.
We really need to do a linguistic deep dive into that specific phrase because it unlocks the whole economic metaphor. The word thaman in Arabic is often translated simply as price, but that is too simplistic. Thaman implies the concept of equivalent exchange. If you go to a market and trade a solid gold coin for a large sack of wheat, the market has determined that those two things have equivalent value. That exchange rate is the thaman.
Okay, I follow that. The Quran is warning us against exchanging our integrity for a price. But it qualifies that price by calling it miserable or small.
Right.
Now, if I am a cynic, I might look at that and say, okay, sure, selling out my principles for $20 is a miserable price. But what if a massive corporation offers me $1 billion to look the other way on a safety inspection? $1 billion is not a small price.
That's really not small.
That is a massive, life-changing amount of wealth. How is that a qalilan thamanan?
And this is where Parwez's analysis becomes incredibly sharp. He addresses that exact cynical hypothetical. He explains that eternal values, what he calls permanent values like truth, absolute justice, and unshakable integrity, have no worldly physical equivalent. They do not exist on a finite scale. They exist on a scale of infinity.
Because they don't degrade.
Exactly. Worldly goods, however, whether it is a $20 bill, $1 billion in gold bullion, unparalleled political power, or physical comfort, are all inherently finite. They have a limit.
Right.
So speaking purely mathematically, attempting to exchange an infinite value for a finite object will always inherently be a terrible trade. Selling your integrity for $1 billion is still selling it for a miserable price, because a finite number, no matter how large you make it, can never equal infinity.
The math of the equivalent exchange breaks down completely.
It does.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Parwez derives a whole theory from this broken math based on verse 96, which states, "What is with you must vanish, what is with Allah will endure." We can call this concept social physics.
Let's break down the mechanics of this social physics. In the physical universe, everything is subject to the law of entropy. Things inevitably break down, decay, rust, and are consumed.
Right. Cars rust, food goes bad.
The money you hoard is eventually spent or loses its value to inflation. The grand empires you build crumble into dust. The physical bodies we desperately try to protect will age and die. Therefore, what is with you, meaning the physical material things you accumulate and prioritize, will eventually vanish. It's an immutable law of physics. There is no escaping it.
But the second half of the equation is the game changer. What is with Allah will endure. And in Parwez's philosophical framework, what is with Allah isn't referring to some physical treasure chest in the sky.
No, it refers to those permanent values we've been talking about.
Justice, honesty, trust, compassion. When you successfully build these values into the culture and systems of your society, they defy social entropy. They become the permanent self-sustaining infrastructure of the future.
Yes.
I'm picturing this like a massive computer network. If you live in a low-trust society where everyone's trying to hack each other, you have to build massive firewalls, incredibly complex encryption, and constant security protocols just to send a simple email.
Right, the system just bogs down.
The entire system slows to a crawl because of the friction of mistrust. The energy is wasted on defense. But if you have a network where every node is perfectly honest, you can strip away all that security. The data moves at light speed. The permanent value of trust eliminates the friction.
That is a fantastic analogy, honestly. When you tell a strategic lie to make a quick profit or win an election, you are essentially trading a permanent piece of your society's infrastructure, the trust network, for a temporary decaying physical asset.
Wow, yeah.
You are tearing up the paved roads of your civilization just to build a personal bonfire that will keep you warm for one night, but leave everyone stranded the next day.
It's a powerful image.
Conversely, when you uphold a covenant, especially when it costs you personally and financially, you are laying down a permanent brick in a foundation that will serve generations.
To explain how a society actually manages to lay down these bricks, when the temptation to build bonfires is so strong, Parwez unpacks an incredible ancient Arabic maritime analogy. It revolves around the Quranic concept of Sabr. Now, if you read most translations, Sabr is almost always translated as patience or steadfastness.
And Parwez is highly critical of how passive that translation has become in modern usage. Patience sounds like you were just sitting quietly in a waiting room, hoping things eventually get better on their own. He argues that Sabr is not passive endurance. It is a highly active, muscular, dynamic force.
To illustrate this, he points to the linguistic root of the word, and specifically the term sabora.
Sabr.
Imagine an ancient, heavy wooden trading ship sailing across the open ocean. Suddenly, a massive, violent storm hits. The ship is being tossed violently from side to side by massive waves and hurricane winds. It is in imminent danger of completely capsizing.
Right.
To prevent this, the ancient sailors didn't just pray and wait. They used a sabra, which were massive, incredibly heavy ballast stones strategically placed in the absolute lowest part of the ship's hull.
The physics of the ballast are crucial here. The heavy stones lower the ship's center of gravity. They provide an intense stabilizing downward force that actively counters the chaotic, tossing rotational force of the storm. Without the heavy burden of the ballast, the ship is too light, it flips over, and everyone drowns.
Parwez asserts that Sabr is the heavy ballast of integrity in a society.
Yes.
When the societal storms hit, when inflation is soaring and people are desperate, when political chaos is everywhere and demagogues are screaming, when your competitor is cheating and getting ahead and you are falling behind, that is the storm trying to capsize your societal ship.
And in that storm, the temptation is always to throw the heavy stones overboard to lighten the load. Right. The temptation is to say we can't afford to be honest right now. It's too heavy of a burden.
We have to survive.
Exactly. But Parwez says Sabr is the absolute refusal to throw your principles overboard. It is the heavy, sometimes burdensome, sometimes financially costly commitment to truth that keeps the entire society from flipping over into chaos.
It is such a sobering image. A society without Sabr, a society without that ballast of absolute integrity, is just a cork floating on the ocean. It will simply ride the surface of whatever temporary political or economic wave is popular at the moment, and inevitably, when the wave breaks, it will capsize.
So we have to ask the logical next question. If a society actually manages to act as this ballast, if it strictly adheres to this social physics and absolutely refuses to trade infinite values for finite short-term gains, what is the mathematical output? Where does the ship actually arrive?
That brings us to the destination outlined in verse 97, which promises the ultimate output of pure life, or Hayat on Tayyiba, to whoever works righteousness and has faith.
Right.
But Parwez zeroes in on a very specific phrasing in this verse that is easily overlooked if you aren't paying close attention. The verse explicitly states that this promise applies to male or female.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, The explicit inclusion of male or female in this classical text is revolutionary, and Parwez uses it as a foundational pillar for his sociology. Parwez, writing heavily from the rationalist school of thought, views this explicit mention of gender as an engine of reason. It serves as definitive scriptural proof that the Quran's law of requital, which is the fundamental immutable law of cause and effect in human actions, is entirely gender-blind.
I want to make sure I understand the magnitude of this. By explicitly saying male or female, this verse is effectively dismantling the patriarchal monopolies of its time, and frankly, it challenges the systemic biases of our time, too.
It absolutely does.
It is stating a cold, hard mathematical equation. Productivity plus conviction yields the exact same results regardless of the biological identity of the person performing the action.
Exactly. It removes the human tendency to gatekeep value based on identity.
Yeah.
If a man lays down a brick of permanent value, if he tells the truth when it is difficult, society benefits and he earns that outcome. If a woman lays down that exact same brick of permanent value, society benefits equally and she earns the exact same outcome.
The universe doesn't care.
No, the universe, or the law of requital, does not care about the gender, the race, or the pedigree of the builder. It only registers the integrity of the brick.
It establishes a pure, unadulterated meritocracy based solely on moral action and productivity. And the promised result of this meritocracy is that Hayat and Tayyiba. Let's look closer at that phrase, specifically the word tayyib.
Okay.
Because translating it simply as pure life sounds a bit abstract, maybe even a little sterile.
Tayyib is an incredibly rich and comprehensive Arabic word. Yes, it means pure in the sense of being uncorrupted, but it also carries heavy connotations of being pleasant, delightful, wholesome, and thriving. Parwez notes that the root is often used in Arabic literature to describe a healthy tree that bears the absolute best, most nourishing fruit.
Oh, thriving tree.
A tayyib life is emphatically not a life of ascetic monkhood where you are starving in a cave to prove your purity. It implies a life of lightness, of pleasantness, of thriving in your environment.
This connects directly back to the hook we started with, the flow state.
Yes, the flow state.
This verse isn't promising that if one specific individual refuses to lie on their taxes, a magical pot of gold will appear on their porch. It is describing the macro effect on an entire society.
Exactly, it's systemic.
When the ballast of truth is maintained by everyone, male and female, participating equally and honestly, the friction of deceit is completely eliminated from the system.
Think about the staggering amount of human energy and capital in our modern world that is wasted solely on friction.
Oh, it's immense.
Corporate lawyers drafting 1,000-page contracts, massive compliance departments, infinite background checks, security cameras on every corner, complex locks, fraud investigations, antivirus software.
It's exhausting just listing them.
All of this is friction. It is monumental energy and wealth spent not on creating new art or discovering new medicines or building better homes, but solely on protecting ourselves from each other's potential lies.
If you could somehow remove that friction, if you lived in a society where a spoken promise was an absolute verifiable guarantee, the amount of human energy that would suddenly be freed up for genuine innovation, for creativity, for deep human connection is almost unimaginable.
It really is.
That is the true flow state. That is Hayat on Tayyiba, a society operating at maximum efficiency and maximum peace, because literally no one is wasting a single calorie of energy looking over their shoulder waiting for the foot to slip.
But arriving at this beautiful realization naturally leads us to the most frustrating, agonizing question of the entire human experience.
Which is?
If this flow state is so clearly mathematically and sociologically beneficial for everyone involved, why is it so impossibly hard to achieve? Why do human beings constantly, repeatedly sabotage themselves and their own societies by lying, cheating, and breaking trust?
Because we know the math. We know the bridge is going to collapse if we use cheap steel, but we use it anyway. We know the lie poisons the well, but we drink from it.
Yeah.
Why?
This brings us to the final and perhaps most psychologically complex part of our deep dive. Verses 98 and 99 deal directly with the mechanics of this self-sabotage.
Okay.
They address the concept of the shaitan, the adversarial force, and how this force specifically operates to disrupt the flow state and tempt us into throwing the ballast overboard.
Verse 98 begins with an instruction. It tells the reader that when they read or recite the Quran, they should first seek refuge in Allah from the rejected shaitan. The Arabic term for this act of seeking refuge is isti'atha.
Yes.
Now, Parwez spends a lot of time clarifying a massive cultural misconception about this concept. In common practice, people often treat this as a magical verbal chant. Like if you just murmur the Arabic words "Auzu billah" before you open the book, it acts like a magical invisible force field that keeps bad thoughts away from your brain.
Parwez is highly critical of this passive, ritualistic approach. He digs into the linguistics of the verse to prove his point. The word used for read or recite here is kara. Parwez argues that while it means to read in its deepest, most impactful root, kara signifies a state proclamation or alaman.
A state proclamation that's very different.
Very different. It means broadcasting a message to establish a new reality.
So it's not about sitting alone in your bedroom murmuring words. It means actively attempting to establish a systemic public order based on these permanent values of truth and justice.
Precisely. And Parwez points out that when you attempt to establish a systemic order based on absolute truth in a world that profits from deception, you are going to face massive organized opposition.
Right. The system fights back.
The corrupt systems will fight back. That is when you desperately need istiada. And the analogy Parwez uses to explain this seeking of refuge is deeply grounding. He compares it to tiny chicks running under the outstretched wings of a mother hen when a predatory hawk is circling above them.
The mother hen is the ultimate umbrella of protection.
Yes, it is not a magical incantation. It is the act of seeking an actual systemic umbrella of protection.
Makes sense.
When you try to be the honest whistleblower in a corrupt corporation or the honest politician in a corrupt system, the corrupt system will try to destroy you. The hawk will swoop down.
So seeking refuge means what exactly?
Seeking refuge means creating and actively relying on a collective systemic umbrella of protective laws, mutual support, and allied individuals to shield those who are bravely trying to uphold permanent values.
This raises an important question. What exactly are these destructive forces, these hawks that are circling us today? Because, as we said earlier, it's not a cartoon guy with a pitchfork and horns whispering in our ears.
Definitely not.
How does the adversary actually operate in a modern, sophisticated society?
Parwez argues that the most dangerous and effective form of shaitan today operates almost entirely through psychological warfare and ideological subversion. He dedicates significant time in this lecture to fiercely critiquing modern psychological and sociological determinism.
Determinism. Let's define that for the listener really quick. It's the philosophical idea that human beings are essentially just highly complex biological robots reacting to stimuli, and that our choices are not really our own.
Exactly. Parwez specifically mentions theories like strict behaviorism and instinctism, and he references the work of psychoanalysts like Erich Fromm.
Now, it is important to note that Parwez is not dismissing the entire field of psychology or denying that our past affects us.
No, of course not. What he is fiercely critiquing are the deterministic conclusions drawn from these fields. These dominant modern theories often broadcast a message to youth that they are not actually independent moral agents.
The message is you are merely the helpless product of your socioeconomic environment, your genetic evolutionary instincts, your brain chemistry, or the unresolvable traumas of your childhood.
And if you follow that logic to its conclusion, it results in the ultimate removal of personal accountability.
Right.
If I lie to my business partner, it's not because I made a poor, selfish moral choice. It's because my highly competitive capitalist environment conditioned me to lie to survive. If I act aggressively, it's just my evolutionary biology acting out. I am fundamentally a victim of my own existence.
I see exactly how this dissolves trust. If I believe that neither I nor anyone else has actual free will, then how can I trust anyone to keep a promise? If we are all just acting out our conditioning, then a promise is just a temporary arrangement of words that will be overridden by our instincts the moment things get tough.
Exactly. Parwez argues that this relentless deterministic messaging inevitably leads to a state of ultimate frustration and societal apathy. If you genuinely believe you have no free will, why would you ever put in the agonizing effort to build the Sabr?
Why carry the stones?
Why would you carry the heavy ballast of integrity if you believe the storm of your genetics is going to capsize you anyway? You don't. You just surrender to the storm. Parwez identifies this modern determinism as the primary mechanism of shaitan. It is a highly intellectual way of convincing people they have no agency.
And the terrifying reality is that when people believe they have no agency, they become incredibly easy to control.
Very easy.
If I am a political demagogue or a massive corporation and I can convince you that you are just a helpless product of your desires and fears, Then I can manipulate those desires through targeted propaganda, through algorithmic advertising, through fear-mongering news cycles.
Yes.
I can dictate how you vote, what you buy, and who you hate, all while you think you are just following your nature. Parwez brilliantly calls this the colonization of wealth and ideas.
It is a profound psychological colonization. In the past, ancient empires colonized nations by sending armies with swords to physically conquer territory. Today, Parwez suggests the colonization happens in the mind through media and deterministic philosophies.
It's an invisible war.
If the adversary can convince you that you are helpless against your own impulses, they've already won the war and conquered your society without firing a single shot.
Which is exactly why verse 99 is so incredibly powerful. I just marvel at this verse after understanding this context. The verse explicitly states that Shaitan has absolutely no authority, no sultan, no ruling power over those who believe and trust in their Lord.
It is the ultimate anti-deterministic statement in the text.
Yes, it's saying to the reader the determinists are fundamentally wrong. Human beings do have ultimate moral agency. You always have a choice.
Always.
The psychological warfare, the relentless algorithmic propaganda, the harsh environmental conditioning, the childhood trauma, none of it has actual ruling authority over your core self unless you voluntarily hand over the keys. The adversary, the hawk, only has power if you agree to step out from under the umbrella. It only wins if you agree to let your foot slip.
The storm can violently toss the ship. The hawk can circle menacingly over the chicks. The deterministic philosophies can scream from every screen that you are a helpless victim of your trauma, but absolutely none of it can force you to throw your integrity overboard. Your core moral agency remains perfectly intact.
That is so empowering.
If you choose against all odds to anchor yourself to those permanent values, the chaotic forces completely lose their grip on you. You become unhackable.
It all comes back to that single, terrifying, empowering moment of choice. Every single time you are tempted to tell that strategic lie, whether you are a world leader on a grand political stage deciding on a treaty, or you are just a regular person navigating a minor business transaction or a difficult conversation with your spouse, you are making a profound civilizational choice.
Yes.
You are choosing between feeding the entropy and friction of society, or actively acting as the heavy ballast that keeps civilization afloat. You are choosing between cashing in for a miserable temporary price or painstakingly laying down a brick in the permanent infrastructure of a pure life.
And that infrastructure, built one honest interaction at a time, is what makes the flow state, the Hayat and Tayyiba, actually possible. It's not magic. It's not a utopian fantasy. It's just the rigorous, exhausting, beautiful application of absolute unyielding trust.
This has been such an incredible journey through these concepts. It completely shifts the perspective from seeing honesty as just a nice personal virtue that you teach kindergartners to understanding it as the literal physical gravity that holds human society together and prevents it from spinning off into the void.
It's the physics of society.
For you listening, I want to leave you with a final thought to really mull over as you go about your day. If our modern society feels like it is constantly drowning in anxiety, polarization, and frustration today, maybe it is not because we lack resources or technology or data. We have more wealth and information than any generation in human history.
Yeah.
Maybe the relentless anxiety comes because we have systematically thrown our Sabr, our heavy ballast of absolute integrity, overboard in exchange for strategic short-term wins and quarterly profits.
Yeah, we traded the permanent for the temporary.
Think deeply about your own life. Where are the areas, big or small, where you quietly justify the necessary lie? What would your personal life, your workplace, your family dynamics actually look like if you drew a hard line and refused to sell your truth for a miserable price? What if you decided today to be the ballast?
It is a daunting challenge to take on in a world of ice skates. But according to this profound framework, it is the only actual path to building a genuinely pure life that endures.
We've seen how to build a life that lasts. In Lecture 1115, covering Ayat 100, we look at the boundary of influence, why the destructive forces of Shaitan only have power over those who choose to be their allies and turn away from the law.
Thank you for exploring this dense and beautiful material with us today.
Until next time, keep your footing secure, don't let the ground turn to ice, and keep building that permanent infrastructure. Take care, everyone.